this one. It's a Scream, baby.
Hello and welcome to What's Your Favourite Scary Movie, a podcast where we discuss and explore our favourite scary movies. I am your host Kate, and next to me is my husband / co-host Fraz. You want to say hi?
Hello. So to start us off, we're going to go through a little bit of an intro, who we are, what kind of horror films we're into, how we first got into horror movies, stuff we found scary, our favourite kind of classic horror films and modern horror films. And I guess we should talk about, as we've been together for, 13 years? All the horror films we watched together
It's a long list.
Over those many, many years. So, Kate, do you want to start? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Kate, obviously. What I'm into, obviously, horror movies. And that's a very, very long list of horror movies as well. I've been watching horror movies since before I was probably old enough to even legally watch horror movies, to be honest.
I think everyone's got that one that they watched before their parents knew they were watching them. We'll get on to that in a minute, actually, because I'm sure we've both got some interesting stories there of being scared absolutely shitless for the first time.
Definitely. Me especially, because I'm a bit of a wuss. But so growing up, I was obsessed with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I think that's kind of where my obsession with horror and like monsters and everything kind of started.
See, I was a Buffy kid too.
Who wasn't a Buffy kid in the 90s?
Yeah, true, but not so much horror movies, because my mum grew up with a mum with a huge fear of horror movies, even some of the most ridiculous characters. Even to this day, if I say Nightmare on Elm Street, she cringes and looks like she's going to start. Poltergeist is a good one. Yeah, we need to get her to watch that unwittingly sometime. But yeah, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, definitely a huge early influence on me. This will come up again as well, but when I was, I think, 8 or 9, I had a TV in my bedroom at home for the first time.
Lucky you.
At the time, yeah,
I didn't.
Kind of lucky me, but not so lucky for my performance at school, which took a bit of a nosedive. But at the time, my family lived in a pub, and my brother and I, our bedrooms were on the very top floor, 3-story building, top floor. Parents are downstairs working at night until the pub closed. So I just used to stay up watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer on, I think it was on BBC Two really late at night at the time.
It was on Channel 4.
I'm sure it was on the BBC.
No, it was on Channel 4 after The Simpsons.
No arguments. No, it was on later at night, because The Simpsons used to be on BBC Two.
What?
Then it moved to Channel 4. I'm old enough to remember that.
I'm literally a year younger than you. How do I not know that?
Okay. Well, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, they used to air after The Simpsons on BBC Two every weeknight, and then late at night, like 11 PM, they aired an uncensored version with all the good stuff added back in.
I was never allowed to stay up that late.
No,
so.
Neither was I, but I did anyway. Mum, Dad, if you're listening, you probably know anyway, because you used to come up and catch me with the TV on all the time. But Buffy the Vampire Slayer, certainly. And then I just watched whatever horror films were showing on, pretty often Channel 4 or Channel 5 that night. Some of them absolutely traumatized me. In fact, the series we're going to talk about today, my earliest memory, so we're going to move on to earliest memory of a horror film, and the one that scared me first. So the one that I remember watching first and that scared me first was Scream.
Was it actually?
And I watched it on my own really late at night, and that first scene with Drew Barrymore where she gets killed and then she's hung up in the tree.
Whoa, spoilers. Jesus.
Well, okay. Let's just get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way first. If you're listening to this podcast, you've probably seen these movies that we're discussing.
I should hope so. They came out in the 90s.
Yeah, a lot of them are going to be old movies. So there will be spoilers. Sorry, we can't really discuss them without going into spoiler territory, and that's, what's going to happen. We're probably not going to do full synopsis for this episode of each movie, because we're covering 4 movies. It's just going to be our general thoughts, what we like, what we don't like, and which ones are our favourites from the series. But back on track a little bit. Scream. So that first scene with Drew Barrymore, and the bit that really shit me up was that quick pan in on
where she's hanging up in the tree.
Her face, hanging in the tree, her face, her intestines hanging out. I remember I had an old, big boxy CRT TV in my room, and it made such a loud noise when you switched it on and off.
Kids these days will not know what we're on about.
I remember one side of the room, my bed, other side of the room, the TV. I remember jumping out of bed, running across the room and hitting that button so hard my TV almost fell off of its stand. That was probably the first horror movie that that really made an impression on me. I think the first time I actually saw a horror film in any context, I saw a brief clip of A Nightmare on Elm Street. When I was growing up, my parents' neighbours, they were good friends, and my brother and I were friends with the kids that lived next door, and we used to hang out with them all the time whilst our parents were around there, doing parent stuff, drinking and chatting shit in the kitchen.
Did you all just band together and rebel and watch all these horror movies?
We used to just scroll through. They had Sky TV.
Oh,
I never
luxury.
had Sky TV growing up.
Oh my God, rich kids.
Yeah, next door had Sky TV, and we just used to scroll through the movie channels. And one night, Nightmare on Elm Street came on, and the exact part that came on, I found it hilarious, which looking back is quite weird because it is pretty disturbing for a young child. I was probably 6 or 7 at this point.
Was it the Johnny Depp scene?
Not the Johnny Depp scene, the bit where his face gets pulled off, and it's the skull underneath. The rubbery shit.
Yeah.
And that scared my brother, who is 4 years younger than me for context. So he was maybe 3 or 4 at the time.
Oh my God.
He was
no.
traumatized. And my neighbour's daughter, who is about my age, she was pretty scared by it as well. So yeah, that's my kind of earliest forays into horror movies and stuff that scared me. What about you?
I actually had a pretty opposite experience to you as a kid. My mum was quite into horror movies, but she wouldn't let me watch them. And I remember sort of if I ever came downstairs late at night and she was watching a horror movie on the TV, she'd immediately turn it off and be like, "What are you doing? Go back to bed." And I'd obviously be curious as to what she was watching. And I think that's kind of what pushed me into stealing copies of DVDs that I shouldn't have been watching. So I would kind of go into my grandparents' DVD cabinet because my uncle was living with them at the time, and he had lots of DVDs that were above the age I should have been looking at, really. And I remember taking The Exorcist to a sleepover when I was about 12 or 13. And
going deep.
Yeah, that was the very first proper horror movie that I remember watching, and it scared the absolute piss out of me. I think considering that I was the kid that was into the monsters and the horror and the weird stuff like Buffy, I think it scared me more than it scared anybody else at the sleepover. I couldn't sleep for about a week after watching that. So yeah, The Exorcist holds a special place in my heart, but not for good reason.
Not for good reasons, for absolutely traumatising yourself.
And I
as a
don't
child.
think I actually told anybody still. So my mum was wondering, why is my child not sleeping? It's because I was absolutely traumatised.
Speaking of the DVDs and the DVD cabinet, I remember quite distinctly. So my mum and my dad split up when I was about 7, 8, and I used to go to my dad's at the weekend. And I distinctly remember most nights when me and my brother were at my dad's for the weekend, we'd go to
Blockbuster?
It wasn't Blockbuster, it was Choices.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's showing my age now.
Yeah.
So before the Blockbuster in our local town was a Blockbuster, which is no longer there. RIP Blockbuster.
Oh my God, I miss Blockbuster so much.
It was Choices, and my dad would take us in there to rent a film to watch Friday, Saturday night. And they'd go off and look at, latest films, all your... I can't even remember what the big films were back then when I was about that age, to be honest, but my brother was younger than me, so it was always kind of like your Toy Stories and that kind of thing.
Disney
I'd go
films.
look at the horror section, and I'd pick up all the DVDs and look at the covers. And some of the stuff they had in their horror section was I think they had Cannibal Holocaust in there.
Wait, was it not blocked out?
No.
Whoa.
No, the horror section. No,
I
they've
swear-
never blocked out a horror section. The only thing they ever covered up in there, I think, when they had them with
boobs.
their booby films.
Booby films.
Which I never got around to looking at because I was too busy looking at pictures on the back of horror movie DVD boxes of scared. Well, at the time, I guess the big thing in horror movies was your teen slasher films like Scream. So the majority of them they had in their front and centre were films like I Know What You Did Last Summer and that kind of thing.
I've never watched that.
But they're okay. We'll get to those, I'm sure. But it was always picking up the DVD cases of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and all the kind of weird horror B movies. You know, they had Reanimator, Evil Dead, and I was just transfixed at all the images on the box art. And some of them were quite gory and scary for a child.
Did you ever look at like the Japanese horrors and that? They are scary.
No,
the
because
covers for those are scary.
They didn't have many, and I think that's just because the Japanese horrors didn't really become a thing until the Ring remake.
Oh, okay.
You know, before that point, there wasn't that much. I don't think in many kind of local DVD rental shops. I miss DVD rental shops.
I do. I miss Blockbuster so much.
Yeah, there wasn't much in the way of like your Japanese horror films. It was all American slashers and your straight to DVD crap, basically. Because but we're gonna mention this, but before Scream came out, that was really all there was. You had your sequels to your 80s kind of classics, Friday 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, of rapidly diminishing quality. But there wasn't much in the way of original good horror movies until Scream came along and really changed the entire genre.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute anyway. So what about your favourite horror film?
Okay.
Like your classic one and then your like modern one. What's top of the list for you?
So, classic, this is a difficult question and it changes a lot all the time because you've got those original, the four, what I'd say, OGs of the horror genre. You got your Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Mike Myers, and Leatherface. They're the original four for me. Those are iconic characters. For me, out of all those, that's what I'd call your horror classics. Is anything revolving around those four characters? I think the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Really?
The reason being because it's so gritty, it's so well made considering the tiny budget. You really see, we will do a series on these movies as well and all of these franchises. But the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, again, was a movie that I watched late at night on my TV in my bedroom that I really should not have been watching at the age I was at the time. And reading the description. So this is back when you had TV Guide magazines. And I remember reading the description for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was showing on Channel 4 fairly late at night. And just the description really kind of put me on edge. I was thinking, do I want to watch this? And I got as far as the scene where I think it's Kirk has gone into the house. He's been hit with the hammer.
And dragged into the doors.
Dragged through the doors. Leatherface slams the door. And that's when I was poised on the edge of my bed ready to go and turn it off. The next part was when I'm blanking on her name right now, and this is really bad for it being my favourite classic horror film, but when the girl that follows him into the house goes in, she's in the living room with all the bones, she's freaking out, and she runs out, and Leatherface comes out and chases her and grabs her.
And
takes her into the room, hangs her on the meat hook, and pulls out the chainsaw. That was it. Done. Yeah. Turned it off. Didn't want to watch anymore. And after that point, I was just so shit scared of chainsaws. If I'd hear a chainsaw, I'd be like, oh God, someone's going to kill someone with this chainsaw. Really stupid, but I was like 10 at the time.
Yeah, so, you're impressionable
pretty
at that
understandable.
What about your modern
horror films. So this is with the slight caveat that we haven't watched Hereditary, Midsummer, a couple of recent films that are supposed to be very, very good.
Yeah. I haven't got around to those yet.
I'm trying to think what the most modern horror, the most up-to-date horror film I've actually seen is.
Probably
because
like
since the big global bastard kicked off and none of us can go to cinemas anymore.
Yeah, that's very true.
It was either Us or Halloween.
Really?
Yeah, because you don't like horror movies in the cinema anyway.
Yeah, I'm not kidding when I said in the beginning that I'm a bit of a wuss, so I don't.
You won't go to the cinema to watch a horror movie.
I'll go and watch slashers because the slashers don't scare me, like the Halloweens, the Texas Chainsaw Massacres, that kind of stuff. But I won't, hands down, I won't go and watch like a possession demon ghost movie in the cinema just because they are the ones that really shit me up the most, but we'll get onto that.
Yeah. So I think the last one that we probably watched was together in the cinema, either Halloween or Us. But my favourite, what I'd call a modern horror film, is anything made in, I'd say, the last 10 to 15 years. It's actually the Evil Dead remake.
Really?
I think that's a really good film. It's a really good kind of update to a classic. Again, we may cover the Evil Dead series as well. Something about it, I think it's for one, the gore, the effects are really, really good. Yeah. And, practical horror effects are far and away better than any CGI
I hate horror films that rely heavily on CGI.
Exactly. I think the most ridiculous kind of instance of that I've seen in the last 10, 15 years is Texas Chainsaw. We watched that.
Yeah, which part?
At the end where the mayor, the dodgy mayor, gets dragged down into the meat grinder. Leatherface cuts his hands off and he slides down.
Yeah.
And it looks like a fucking PS1 game. It's so bad. It's the worst effects I've seen in a horror for any film since, I think my earliest memory of bad effects in a horror film was watching the special edition of Star Wars Return of the Jedi, and the Rancor against the background looks really, it's so obviously a digital effect.
You're not going to be able to get through a single podcast without mentioning Star Wars in some way, shape
definitely
or form.
not. But this is a horror podcast, so I won't gush on Star Wars yet. Although I do get to mention Carrie Fisher in this episode, so bit of a bonus. Anyway. But yeah, that's my favourite modern horror movie. Like I say, it's a really good version of a classic horror film.
So your favourite classic is Texas Chainsaw and your favourite modern is Texas Chainsaw?
No, Evil Dead.
Oh, Evil Dead,
I was using Texas Chainsaw as a bad comparison for the crap CGI. Yeah, Evil Dead. It's such a good version of... I wouldn't even say it's a remake because it is supposed to be a continuation of the original movie, and the whole thing, I can't remember where I read it, but the whole thing that I think one of the screenwriters or directors said is it is a continuation, it is a sequel, and it's about the events are cyclical, they repeat. So the same events that happened in the original with Ash have happened again.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I think it's a really good kind of updated version of that classic. The only bit that really disappointed me is you didn't get to see that kind of Ash character wielding a chainsaw.
I miss Ash in the new one. I did miss him. I was kind of hoping that
well,
Bruce
he is
Campbell
in it,
would...
really. He pops up at the end, doesn't he? And says groovy and then disappears.
I know, but I was kind of hoping that he would come in a bit earlier with his like boomstick or his chainsaw or something, you know. Yeah.
There is the TV series. That's good. That is good. I do need to continue
Ash
watching that because I haven't finished that, which, bad phrase, but haven't watched that yet. So, what's your favourites, classic and modern horror movie?
Hands down, my favourite classic is the original Nightmare on Elm Street. I think everybody that knows me kind of knows that I'm a bit of a simp for Freddy. I just think he's a great character, and I think they're...
He is for the first few movies.
For the first few movies, yes. Well, we won't talk about that right now. And I just think that there's some really iconic kills in the first Nightmare on Elm Street that just make it so rewatchable. Like, it's like, oh, this Johnny Depp scene's coming up. Look at him get sucked into that bed.
Just don't talk about the blow-up doll getting sucked through the door, the door hole.
Yeah, we won't mention that.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
Yeah, I just really I hate what they've done to him in the modern remake though. I hate that they've made him like a child molester.
Yeah, we're gonna do. I
won't get onto that.
I'm planning
right now.
ideas for this moving forward, but we will do a remakes episode where we'll talk about our favourite and least favourite horror movie remakes, because that's one of the worst things I think of the 2000s is the lack of originality, and remakes just started being splurged out everywhere. And I don't think there's a horror remake coming out now that I really want to see.
No, probably not.
Okay.
Anyway, getting back to my... Can I talk now? Can I finish? Can I finish?
Really?
That's a South Park reference.
No, that's Archer.
Is it?
Yes, it's the drug. The guys they sell the drugs to.
It's South Park.
It's Archer.
It's South Park.
I'm going to find the clip later.
It's the Canadians. It's the Canadian news reporter. Yeah, I know what I'm talking about. So yeah, my classic is Nightmare on Elm Street, hands down. I just absolutely love that film, and I just think Freddy Krueger he's not too campy in the first film, but he's just...
No, he is quite scary in the first film.
Yeah, he is quite scary in the first film, and that's why I think that's my favourite. As for modern, I think it's... I mean, like Frau said, we haven't really seen a whole lot of like modern films that were released in like the last sort of year or so, like Hereditary, Midsummer. I think they were like 2019 or something.
I think so.
But
what
because
even is 2020?
Because of Corona, we haven't been able to go out and watch new films.
Well,
and
nothing's been released. So,
well, yeah, true. Everything's been pushed back and everything.
Yeah,
so, but I would say maybe the Jordan Peele movies are really good. Get Out and Us.
Yeah. See,
so good.
I know they are classed as horror films, but I'd call them more thrillers because, aside from the psychological aspects of it, I didn't find them that scary. I think Us was definitely creepier because...
Us was definitely... I think actually between the two, Us is probably my favourite modern horror movie. But that's probably going to change with films that I watch to do this podcast, we're definitely going to have to watch more modern horror movies.
Yeah,
so
we need to find time
at
to
the
watch some
moment,
more.
at the moment, I'd say Us is probably my favourite modern horror movie, just because, just the way it's shot. The tethered ones are just so creepy, and if you haven't seen Us, then I'd highly recommend it, because
The voice that she does.
the voice don't know, that shit me up in the cinema. I hated that. But yeah, that
kind of guttural,
I'd definitely say that was one of my favourite modern horror movies. I'm not a fan of any remakes, and that's all I'm gonna say.
I think the most recent Halloween, it's a sequel, not so much a remake, but it
doesn't count.
I call it a reboot because it is kind of it's retconning and ignoring the series beyond the first movie.
Well, even as the Halloween series, it jumps all over the place.
We'll get to Halloween as well, because that's a mess. But I think that was very, very well done for
I did enjoy
what's
it.
effectively a remake. I was actually watching that last night. So that's a really good example of a remake. But as I've said, we'll get onto remake territory in a later episode.
So horror films that we've watched together, like that list is quite long, because we've been together for 13 years. For the listeners that don't know, I said in the beginning, it's my husband. We're married. We've been together for 13 years. So we've obviously watched a lot of films together, and a lot of them have been horror films. Whether or not we found them scary is a different
story.
Yeah.
Some stick out more to me than others. I think the ones that really stick out to me are the ones that had other things associated with when we were watching them at the time. I mean, for example, Saw. We watched the Saw movies for the first time, I think, with our friend Jack. And when we were watching one of them, your dad called you from the States, and that's why that one really sticks out to me.
I don't remember that.
We were eating popcorn. We were in your room at your mum's house eating popcorn, watching it. Your dad called, and we were trying to explain to him what the hell we were watching. And I remember Jack just in the background going, "A guy's going to cut off his feet." And your dad was so confused by that.
I don't know.
That. Yeah, I don't know if your dad will even remember that now, but that sticks out to me. And the other one was so you stayed at my parents. Again, Jack came round and we watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the beginning.
Yeah. I was too afraid to go up the stairs afterwards.
It's not a great film, but I think my parents were away somewhere that evening. And after the movie, we'd switched off all the lights because we were going to go crash. We were going to, I think Jack crashed in my brother's room or something. And it was literally like, who's going to go up the stairs first?
Yeah, and I didn't want to. I was too scared.
Looking back on it now, watching that film back now, it's not scary at all. But back then,
I think it's because of the fact that we were kids and we were alone in the house. Because we were kids, we were like teenagers.
Yeah.
And we were alone in this house by ourselves, and it was just like, right, who's gonna make that dash up the stairs in the dark? I didn't want to do it. I had to make one of the boys do it. I can't remember who went first, but it definitely wasn't me.
Yeah, and then I think some of the others that we've watched together are probably the first time you've watched some of them. So Friday the 13th, the original Friday the 13th, when we watched that together, that's the first time you'd watched that.
I think I think actually the OGs that we were mentioning before, like Freddy, Jason, Michael Myers, and Leatherface, I think I watched all of those movies for the first time with you.
Yeah. Certainly sure. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original, because I remember watching that, and you really weren't that impressed with it when we finished watching it.
Texas Chainsaw.
Yeah, and I think probably because, and this is something that comes up whenever anyone talks about the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, for a movie with the name Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you're expecting blood, guts, and there's very little blood in that movie. Yeah. It's so tame, and its reputation is more based on the suspense that it builds.
Yeah, I appreciate it more now that I'm older than I did when I was a teen, because when I was a teenager, I was just expecting to be scared shitless, and I wanted that, and then when it ended, I was kind of like, well, what the hell was that?
Yeah.
And now I'm like, actually, it's really good.
And then, like, we kind of grew up through, grew up together, I guess, through that whole torture porn period after the first Saw. So after the first Saw, obviously you had the Saw series, you had Hostel, all those kind of movies with, gory, bloody effects that are just about people being put through some awful shit. And I think we watched Hostel together for the first time.
I think with you, I've watched a lot more like of the torture. I hate the phrase, but torture porn, the gory stuff, the slasher movies, and I think I should have mentioned this earlier actually, but a lot of my other horror movie experience, so like the paranormal stuff, the stuff that really shits me up, like the ghosts and the demons and all that kind of stuff, I actually watched with my friend Alex I used to go over to her house a lot when I was younger. And like you said with your dad, we used to go to Blockbuster.
Yeah.
And we used to rent these movies, and we just used to go for like whatever sounded the scariest. So like we'd pick up The Exorcism of Emily Rose, or like The Grudge 2 Japanese version, which I will talk about, but I don't want to talk about because that's a film that's actually scarred me.
The original The Grudge, the American remake,
no,
or the Japanese.
The second Japanese film. I don't know why we picked the second
Okay.
one. I think it was probably the only one there, but we wanted to be scared. So yeah, I think there's a different sort of area of horror that I've watched with you, as opposed to stuff that I've watched with Alex. So thanks, Alex.
I do remember you telling me for the first time that you were scared of The Grudge, and you lived with your mum at the time, and you had the
the attic
hatch in your bedroom. Really weird house design, but you had the attic hatch in your room, and it used to scare the crap out of you. And sometimes to wind you up, I would just make the death rattle.
Yeah. I
don't even like it now.
I hate it.
I've never seen the Japanese versions. I've seen the remake with Sarah Michelle Gellar, or Jella, however you're supposed to say her name.
It's Gellar.
Bad Buffy fan. And yeah, it's scary, but it's not terrifying. I'd be hard pressed to come up with a horror movie apart from those I watched when I was a young wee child that has really genuinely scared me. I think that, saying again, the Evil Dead remake has got one or two really creepy moments. The shot of
Mia poking her head out
the basement when she's turned into a deadite, and the bit earlier where she's first been exposed to whatever the thing is that gets inside her.
In the woods, yeah.
No, the bit where she's sat in the room and they shut the door, and the lightning flashes and you see the creepy ass thing sat in the corner. Didn't like that. No, didn't like that. But anyway, we should probably move on to the kind of meat of this episode. So we're going to talk a little bit about each of the 4 Scream movies. And then I guess at the end, we should rank them.
Yeah. Which
is going to be interesting because I think we're going to have some differences.
I think we might. But
yeah.
I think after I know I said Nightmare on Elm Street was my favourite, but I think after that, I think Scream is one of my favourite horror movie franchises. I think...
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think the reason that I like them so much... God, I'm going to feel old here, but when I was in college, which was over 10 years ago now, I studied film, and I was kind of, for a little bit, one of those wanky film students who went on about all the different aspects of filmmaking.
Were you a Randy?
I was a bit of a... Yeah, that's probably why he's probably my favourite character in these movies, actually. I was a Randy. I'd go on about all the genre conventions, all the cliches, all this kind of stuff.
All the rules.
Yeah, and, I was your typical film student, your Pulp Fiction obsessed prick. Not so much anymore, because it's been a long time.
Not saying
anyone who's obsessed with film and Pulp Fiction's a prick, but film students, you know what you're getting. You do have that kind of... air of superiority when you're talking about movies because you've studied film. And I was that all over. I'm ripping on myself here, nobody else. But that's what I was like. And one of the films we spoke about quite a lot in film studies at my college was the first Scream and how much it changed the entire horror genre. Because, as I said earlier, up to that point, through the 90s, it had been straight to DVD, or not even DVD, straight to VHS, and it's interesting to see how many people out there will know what a VHS is now. Straight to video, low budget B movies, sequels to established franchises, which weren't that good, let's say, and we'll get onto some of those later as well, because there were some real downturns. But when Scream came out in 1996, it was a huge, it kind of changed everything because it started to reference those kind of genre tropes, and it's
very self-aware.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing from it that sticks out for me that really reinforces that is Randy.
There's a formula to it, a very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect.
The bit with Stu where he does the "I'll be back" thing, and it's very very referential to the old movies. Like they mention, you've Jason Voorhees and Friday the 13th right at the start.
Don't kill me, Mr. Ghostface. I want to be in the sequel.
Yeah, and exactly. And it was a huge reinvigoration of the whole genre, subgenre as well. Your teen slasher. So I Know What You Did Last Summer. Cherry Falls came out just after that. Which, have you ever seen that?
I've never seen Cherry Falls.
That's actually quite good. We'll have to watch that. And then even, some more established franchises released films after Scream that kind of ate that formula. So Halloween H2O is so different to the first Halloween movies, and it's got more of a comedic tone to it.
I was going to say, I think it has the perfect balance of like horror and comedy without
Scream, you mean?
Yes, not Halloween. So Scream, I think, has the perfect balance of horror and comedy without being too campy. Where the first one, I would say, is that, but then it does get a bit silly in later films. Obviously, we'll talk about that in a bit. And I think that happens with a lot of franchises. They start out strong, and then as they go on, they do get a bit campy, a bit silly. And I think the first Scream had the balance just perfect. But did you know it was actually inspired by real murders?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Gainesville Ripper. So he was a murderer operating in Florida in the 90s, which I found quite interesting. I didn't know that until I did some research. It's a bit, so when you say it's a bit of a mix of horror and comedy, and when you sort of look back and say, oh, it's inspired by actual murders, you do feel a bit like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't be saying that, but
yeah.
Fun fact for you all. So the first Scream came out in 1996, and I have to say that the opening scene for that movie is iconic.
That, as I was saying earlier, that opening with a big name actor like Drew Barrymore killed off that quickly into a movie, and she was all over, her face is on the poster and all over the marketing and everything for that movie, and she's dead in the first 20 minutes of the movie. And back then, the first time I really watched Scream with a kind of recognition of it beyond that initial childhood, oh god, she's dead in the tree, and I turned it off. When I watched it for the first time, and I was like, oh, that's Drew Barrymore.
Yeah.
Like, she was a big star in the 90s, and she's dead, that quickly. And
that kind of sparked off a thing though, didn't it, with the Scream films having
each movie, the second one, Jada Pinkett is killed in the cinema right at the start.
And then the third one,
you got Heather Graham as well in the second one.
Yes.
plays Drew Barrymore's character for the first movie in Stab in the cinema.
Yeah, I know. I think it's an iconic scene, especially because it's got that one line that everybody seems to know. That's when we're introduced to Ghostface. Well, we don't know he's called Ghostface at this point, but that's when we're introduced to him.
What's your favourite scary movie line? Yeah.
And I think that's such a quotable line, and I think a lot of people, if you say, oh, what's your favourite scary movie, they'll be like, I know what franchise that's from, even if they haven't seen the film.
Yeah, it's one of those lines where, it's right up there with The Godfather and Robert De Niro with Taxi Driver, with those movie quotes where you know exactly where that film's from. Even people who probably haven't seen it, they'll associate it with the Ghostface mask or the voice, even the voice.
But yeah, so that opening scene just has such an impact because, like we said, she's a big name actress, and she's gutted in the first 15 minutes of the movie.
She's killed quite brutally,
and I think that's actually like one of the goriest kills in that film.
One actor in this movie that really kind of is brilliant. Matthew, is it Lillard? Lillard? Yeah. I always read it with an extra I in there.
Shaggy.
I don't know why. Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. He is brilliant. The overacting that he does.
He's hands down my favourite character.
The quotes that he drops into that movie are perfect, especially towards the end when he's been stabbed and he's bleeding out because Billy's, double-crossed him.
I'm feeling woozy here!
And just the overacting in his voice lines and delivery is just amazing.
My mom and dad are gonna be so
And yeah, for me, his character, Stu, is probably the second best character in the movie. In terms of the best, obviously, that's Sidney. I'll let you talk a little bit about Sidney because I know you're a big fan of her throughout the whole series.
I love Sidney. I just really like Neve Campbell. I think she's my favourite end girl or final girl. And for anybody who's listening who doesn't know what that means, in horror films you always get that one surviving girl. And they're sort of, your Nancys, your Sidneys.
Sally, Hardesty.
Yeah. So you always get a final girl. And I think out of all of them, I think Sidney is probably my favourite. She's she's pretty smart as final girls go.
She's smart and she's tough. Like she's quite a tough character. She's not that shrieking kind of runaway scared. She's very
But she's tough from the get-go rather than she has to get tough, if you know what I mean. Like Nancy kind of starts out a bit like me, and then she's like, right, I've got a plan. I've got a plan to catch this fucker. Whereas Sidney from the get-go is like, when she gets that first phone call, she's baiting Ghostface on the other end of the phone, like, oh, what am I doing now, sticking her finger up her nose and all that kind of stuff. So I think she's super smart and she's super tough, which I really love in Final Girls, and do love the fact that she kind of slags off these stupid bimbos in horror movies on the phone, saying that they're stupid to run up the stairs when they should be running out the door. And then what does she do when Ghostface jumps out? She runs up the stairs
and throws a bike at him.
Like, who has a bike just lying on the stairs? I
guess college students in America.
Yeah, well. Yeah. But yeah, I think... Thanks, Luna. Luna wants her voice heard. I think she's my favourite character, and then Matthew Lillard's Stu is definitely my second favourite.
Actually, no, I'm going to throw what I said out the window. Randy's my favourite character because he's me when I was in college. And I think it's a shame that he's killed off in the second movie, which we'll get to in just a moment. But I think, the first Scream, it's such an iconic film. It's got some really good effects. It's got some really good kills as well. I mean, that's, if you're watching a horror film, you're watching a horror film to see people, bad things happen to people. And part of that is them getting killed in nasty ways. The big kind of twist at the end, where that kind of reveal happens, where Billy Loomis and Stu are both the killers throughout the movie.
Billy Loomis being Sidney Prescott's boyfriend. Yeah. So
basically throughout the film, they're alluding to, it could be the boyfriend. I think Randy even says, the boyfriend, alludes to him being the killer. He's arrested and then he's released because someone else is killed at the same time. And I think this was the first movie that had that kind of surprise twist with two people being the killer instead of it being one main villain.
Yeah.
That to me was,
I did not see that coming the first time.
Yeah, the first time I saw that, and the kind of backstory to it with Sidney's mum, and they're the ones that killed her. That's ruined with Scream 3, but again, we'll get to that. But yeah, for me, the first Scream movie, definitely in my top 5 horror films
I think
that I've ever seen, and easily one of the best kind of genre films ever made.
I think with going back to what we said about the twist being like leaving us so shook the first time we watched the film, is I think like the more you watch the films, the first Scream film, once it's Billy, the boyfriend, and his best friend, I think the more you watch the films, the sicker it kind of is.
Yeah.
Because it's like, this is her boyfriend that's, beating her up, terrorising her.
Part of his reason is she's giving him blue balls all the time.
Yeah, which is, what a dick move. Billy Loomis is just the biggest dick in this film.
He's very greasy as well. That hair needs to be washed.
Skeet Ulrich had just the greasiest hair. But yeah, I think it definitely is. It makes it more twisted once you know that it's her boyfriend that seems to love and care for her. And then it's just like, oh, you sick bastard. He's terrorising this poor girl over blue balls.
Yeah. Well, and her mum.
Yeah.
Which is again retcon later.
But
slightly.
I mean, in the beginning, he's all whingy because he's got blue balls.
He's not getting any. Yeah. So, on the subject of Billy Loomis's blue balls, let's move on to Screw. I think we're at a pretty lengthy, running time so far. But we're probably going to have less to say about 2, 3, and 4, purely for the reasons that they're not quite as iconic and groundbreaking as that first film. So moving on to Scream 2. So Scream 2 came out 1997, I think just under a year after the first movie. It
wasn't a full year.
Yeah. And for me, it's good. It's definitely not as good as the first.
Better than the third one, though.
We'll get to our rankings. It's less original. It's a solid follow-up, but yeah, less original. It's very much more of the same, right down to some of the basic plot points. Having two killers is repeated.
Yeah.
Which I found to be quite quite a boring, repetition.
It's
They
like
should
we've
have
already
done
seen
something
that.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah. But something that I found quite interesting about this film, so the plot information actually leaked onto the internet, revealing the identity of who the two killers are at the end of the movie. So with that, the film had a pretty rushed schedule because they wanted to get a sequel out fairly quickly after the first one. And the script was being rewritten quite often, and some parts of the script were being completed on the day of filming. And I think that does come through in the movie with how jumbled it is. And straight away, something that I'm going to mention that I don't like about this film is that cafeteria scene.
Oh my god, I'm so glad you mentioned that.
The singing. Oh my
I
god,
hate that.
It's such an awkward scene.
I hate that scene. If you ever did anything like that to me, I'd be like, bye.
The awkwardness radiates from the screen.
Yeah.
It's so cringy, and I hate it. If there's one part of this film, every time I watch it, that I will happily fast forward through, it's that scene. Because it is just silly.
And it's
Sidney's... Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, it's also the last time you see one of the killers, and then he never makes an appearance again until the very end. And
45 minutes.
Yeah.
45 minutes, yeah. So...
And it's like, well, what point of... What was your point of being in the movie?
Exactly.
Where were you for 45 minutes?
Yeah.
And now suddenly you're like, I'm the killer, Sidney. Like...
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, to me, I mean, Timothy Olyphant is a good actor. I like him in a lot of movies. I'm a huge Die Hard fan, and he's really good in Die Hard 4. But he's a good actor, but his character's a letdown. He's barely in the film in the lead up to the big reveal.
It almost didn't make sense.
And it just felt very forced. Yeah, it felt as though they needed a forced way to have the whole two-killer thing again, and then have the second one be Mrs. Loomis, Billy Loomis's mother. Which, again, a slight niggle with this, that, she's pretending to be a reporter called Debbie Salt earlier in the movie. How does no one recognise her? If she's from that town and she had a child in that town who went on to be
I was going to say.
Famous, you'd imagine, a famous serial killer. How was her
Sidney
face
says,
not
though,
seen
that she's
more
lost
often?
about 60 pounds and had some work done. So
yeah,
that may have something to do with it.
That's very true. But those
time,
creepy ass eyes, they're not going to lose weight, and they're not going to change how much they look.
But at the same time, it only takes Sidney a couple of seconds to recognise her.
That's very true. That's very true. But then Gail earlier in the movie sees her, and if she's been kind of following the whole Woodsboro murders in the background to it as closely as she's said to be,
she would have encountered Mrs. Loomis before.
She'd have encountered her before and probably recognised her. Yeah.
It just seems a bit of a flimsy plot point that I'm not... I get that she's, obviously seeking revenge for her son, but at the same time, it just seems a bit silly that nobody recognises her until that very end scene.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take Sidney very long at all.
And she's crushed by rocks. Foam rocks, stage props.
I was going to say.
And she's crushed under them and unable to get up.
That didn't sit right with me.
It's a little bit silly.
But I can't remember the actress's name who plays Mrs. Loomis. But her dead face is brilliant, I do have to say.
Yes, the cross-eyed kind of with the gunshot right in the middle of her head at the end.
Even before the gunshot. I think her dead face is fantastic.
Yeah.
Something else that I know the Scream films are they don't take themselves seriously, and obviously they talk about the rules, and then at the end of the first one, Randy's like, this is when the killer pops back up for one final scare. They didn't need to do that again with Mickey.
No,
I hated
I don't think they needed to repeat
it was just really cheesy, and I know they're supposed to be a little bit, it's satire, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it didn't need that.
No.
We had that with Billy in the first film. Yeah. We didn't need it with Mickey, especially a character as irrelevant as Mickey.
Yeah. Do you know what? I just realised something as well. We're halfway through talking about the second movie. We haven't mentioned Dewey yet. Dewey's one of those characters.
He's just meh.
So I think Dewey and David Arquette are the same person. David Arquette's acting is just, he's got weird line deliveries. He has weird facial expressions. But I love David Arquette because I'm a huge wrestling fan, and he was WCW World Heavyweight Champion and basically tanked that company. But David Arquette as Dewey, I think he's brilliant, apart from, his weird lines and all that kind of stuff.
I just don't rate him as a character.
I don't like how they do Dewey's gonna die so many times.
Yeah,
he nearly dies in every single film, and then they bring him back.
Yeah.
And, that does, drag that character down slightly.
They do tease it too much. And speaking of things that kind of annoy me, I'm kind of annoyed that Randy was killed off in the second one.
I was just about to mention, this is my biggest problem with this movie.
And his death as well wasn't, like, for a character that had such an impact in the first film, because let's face it, they probably wouldn't have survived without Randy's knowledge of the rules. For a character that's, you know, so close to Sidney and that, you'd have thought that he'd have had a bit of a more memorable death.
Yeah.
Rather than just being stabbed a bunch of times in the van.
Stabbed in a van, and then his face is shown looking like someone's just splattered fake blood on him.
Yeah, it was really disappointing.
Yeah, and especially in my opinion as well, they brought the character back in the third movie through a video.
Yeah.
They could have just kept Randy alive.
They could have just kept him on, yeah.
But I get you have to mix things up a bit and kill off some major characters.
Have some shock value.
Have some, a few
yeah, but if they wanted to kill
turns.
off a major character, why not just kill off Dewey? They've teased him dying twice. This is the thing. They didn't... Well, I guess they kind of teased Randy dying as well, because he was shot in the first one, wasn't he? He was shot by Billy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think he deserved a bit of a more memorable death.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like all we've done is kind of talk shit about Scream 2, but they're just some of the points I didn't like about it. I mean, it's a good follow-up to the original. It's not a bad movie by any stretch. It just didn't feel very original.
It's very hard for sequels to ever top the first film of the franchise, apart from Star Wars. We all know Empire was better than New Hope, but anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad movie by any stretch. I enjoy rewatching it just as much as I enjoy rewatching the first one. But yeah, there's a few little problems with it, and that scene with the kids all in the film class being all geeky about movies, that hurts me on a deep level, because that was me in college. So going from not being particularly glowing about the second movie, we're going to talk about Scream 3.
I'm not talking about
which is
it's an absolute dumpster fire.
Shit sandwich covered in shit.
Almost as bad as Courtney Cox's Fringe in that film.
I'm not commenting on people's hair. But yeah, it's just not good. It's easily the worst in the series. The violence has been dramatically toned down. The main reason for that, understandably, is Columbine happened during the early production of the movie. So it was changed from being a horror movie to more of a comedy film. The setting was also relocated from Woodsboro to Hollywood, because the filmmakers didn't want to have another horror movie set in a small town and around a school, because they were worried they'd attract criticism and, comparisons to Columbine. And the first Scream movie had been blamed for, people ripping it off and copycat, attacks and killings and things like that in the States. So, it's kind of understandable, but it's not made for a good movie at all. There's a lot more emphasis on comedy. For me, the stupidest part of this, there's a lot of stupid parts of this movie. The stupidest kill in the entire franchise, I think, is probably the gas explosion in this one, because how would you not notice that?
Yeah, that was a bit
the house
over the
blowing
top.
up. That's just ridiculous.
And the way they tried to twist it at the end with Sidney's not stepbrother, half brother.
Yeah.
It just, and it's doubling back on everything that Scream 1 sort of laid out with Maureen Prescott.
It completely
Sidney's mother.
just retcons the entire reason behind Stu and Billy. He's, Roman becomes the one kind of pulling the strings, and he says several times throughout the movie, "I'm a director."
Yeah,
and
we get it, dude.
He's barely in the movie up until that point.
Yeah.
And it does make Billy and Stu's actions in the first film feel less important, because they're not then acting of their own volition. They're basically doing what Roman's telling them to do.
I ignore that film.
Which I didn't like.
I ignore that film completely.
I can't take Roman seriously either, because to me, Scott Foley, who plays him, is always Sean from Scrubs, and no one cares Sean.
Yeah.
I grew up watching Scrubs, and that's all that guy is to me, is Sean from Scrubs. And he doesn't make a convincing killer. He's not scary. He's
Sidney
not got
doesn't
a
even
scary
know who he
killer.
is.
Yeah, it takes her a moment to realise who the hell he is, and
because he's wearing glasses for the whole film.
Yeah.
And
his
glasses
face doesn't look like a killer face. He's got quite a round, smiley face.
He's got quite a baby face.
Yeah. But the biggest thing for me that I didn't like about this movie is the gimmick with the voice changer. So throughout the movie, you've had the voice modulator. Someone speaks into it, it gives them that
Ghostface voice,
sexy Ghostface voice, and that's iconic. And this movie, the killer has this modulator device that can basically
mimic
anyone's
anyone's
voice. That technology doesn't exist in 2020, let alone in 2000 when this movie was released.
This movie is just the typical 2000 teen slasher. It's just cheesy as hell. It's just you watch it and you just know that it's from that sort of early 2000s period where horror movies just absolutely sucked. I think it's really easy to tell.
A lot of films that come out in the wake of the original, and this was just a bad version of one of those to me. I mean, you've got a Jay and Silent Bob cameo. I'm a huge Jay and Silent Bob fan. I love everything that Kevin Smith does, even his crap films. Put Jay and Silent Bob in anything and I'm happy, apart from a horror movie franchise, because they just don't fit. Those characters don't belong in what's supposed to be a horror film.
I'll tell you what thing I do like about Scream 3 though.
Go on.
Is Carrie Fisher's cameo.
Yeah. As I said earlier, Carrie Fisher in anything. But yeah,
especially because she's making
3.
fun of herself.
Yes, the whole line with sleeping with George Lucas.
Yeah, to get the role of Princess Leia.
Absolutely love that.
I miss her.
Yeah, me too.
Rip Carrie.
Me too. But yeah, Scream 3 is basically
a dumpster fire.
Absolute trash. One of the worst horror movies I think I've ever sat through.
I don't think you can even brand it as a horror movie. It's just...
I've sat through some bad ones, and this is up there. But then after a lengthy break, 11 years later actually, Scream 4, which we watched together for the first time. I think it was the first Blu-ray I owned actually, because I just got a PS3 for the first time. That was my first Blu-ray player.
We're going back, kids.
I like it. I do like it. It went back to kind of horror elements. It kind of ignores the comedy. It's still got comedy. It's still got its comedy elements. It's a lot gorier than Scream 3, and I'd say probably than Scream 2 as well. There's some good gore in there. Some of the kills are quite brutal as well. And it kind of has its place in the series in terms of updating everything for a more modern audience.
I was going to say, in my opinion, personally, I think it didn't really need to be made, but it's still better than Scream 3. Anything's better than Scream 3. But it's quite cool to see, because you do have the original cast. You have David Arquette, Courtney Cox Arquette, as she was, and Neve Campbell returning to their original roles as Sidney, Dewey and Gale. So it's quite cool to see them in a more modern setting. You've got the internet, you've got like iPhones and stuff, so it is quite cool to see.
And kind of their motivation, Jill and Charlie, their motivation is internet fame. They're recording and live streaming the killings, and they're going to be the survivors. Well, you think they're both going to be the survivors until you get that, again, repeated twist from the original movie where one of them double crosses the other. Charlie's weird looking. I know he's a Culkin. Yeah, he's a Culkin. So he's a strange looking boy though. The long black hair. I had him pegged straight away as soon as we started watching the movie as he's going to be the killer. I didn't suspect Jill straight away.
I didn't suspect Jill. Jill being Emma Roberts' character of Sidney's younger cousin.
Yes.
Is she cousin? I'm not a fan of Emma Roberts. I'm sorry. I just have to say it. I'm just not a fan of her. I haven't ever liked any of her stuff. But I didn't suspect her at all. Like you said, Charlie's a bit of a funny looking dude. You kind of had your suspicions anyway. I kind of suspected him and his mates that's got the little GoPro camera on his head all the time.
Yeah.
Can't remember his name. Irrelevant. Kind of suspected those two as like the new Billy and Stu.
Yeah, I can see that dynamic. Yeah, definitely. And especially because I'm actually just going to have a little look and try and find the guy's name, because I feel bad talking about characters' names when we don't have the information in front of us. Next episode that we record, we're going to have much more comprehensive notes. This has been very rushed this week, trying to get this put together for our first episode. But we're new to this, so things can only go get better from here. Just trying to find him on the IMDb cast as well.
There you go, and I'll talk.
Robbie. Robbie. So Robbie is kind of like the Randy in this movie. He's the film nerd. He's got the camera on his on the side of his head, live streaming
Constantly
everything.
Live streaming.
Yeah. The only thing I don't like about his character, early in the film, Charlie says, only way to survive a horror movie these days
is to be gay.
And then when when he's going to be killed at the end by, it doesn't show you if, I'm going to say Ghostface because it doesn't tell you if it's Jill or Charlie in the costume at the time. But as they're about to kill him, he goes, I'm gay. And
it's like,
he gets killed out. That's a little bit stupid.
Yeah.
But something I did really like about this movie, it goes back to that, the first movie references Friday the 13th, and a load of other, classic movies. This one makes references to films that have come out since 3 had released. So you get references to torture porn films. So your Saws, your Hostels, that kind of thing.
That's in the beginning, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I was just about to say about the beginning. It's quite a weird opening, I think.
Yeah, with the movie within a movie.
Yeah, you've got 2 stab movie openings. So we mentioned it before, but in Scream 2, they've made a movie franchise based on the Woodsboro murders called Stab. And now in Scream 4, they're on Stab 6 and 7?
Yeah.
And it begins with 2 girls watching a stab movie, and then
they're killed,
and then
it's
that's
revealed
the opening
to someone else is watching Stab 7. Yeah,
so weird.
That's Stab 6, and then the people watching are watching that happen in Stab 7, which was quite cool. I like that kind of meta commentary on how all these horror movie franchises have dragged on for so long. I mean, there's 8 Saw films in total, soon to be 9.
Too many Friday 13th films.
Exactly. It's a commentary on how these films just get dragged on and on and on for so long.
I'm not sure how I feel about watching Kristen Bell kill someone though. She's Anna from Frozen, and it just feels wrong.
Yeah.
It just feels wrong.
Yeah.
Drives a big old knife into Anna Park.
Is it Paquin or Packin? Yeah.
The girl from True Blood.
The girl from True Blood, yeah.
Drive a big old knife into her belly. But yeah, that was quite weird, and I think that was it lost me a little bit. So I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
Why are they doing this? There was no need to do that. I kind of hoped they'd have a more original opening, considering it had been 11 years since the last Scream film.
Yeah, definitely.
But, can we talk about Kirby?
You can talk about Kirby if you want to talk about Kirby.
Hayden Hayden Panettiere's character? Don't come at me, I don't know.
Again, pronunciation.
She's plays a character called Kirby, who is just the coolest fucking character. And I really hope that we see her come back in a future Scream film, because you don't actually know if she's dead or not.
No, it's left fairly open-ended.
Her fate is left sort of undecided.
Ambiguous.
I think she's the only character to have that fate.
Yeah.
She is stabbed by Charlie, who's pissy that she never noticed him before. Yeah. Your usual teen bullshit.
He's got Billy's blue balls.
But for someone he's not even dating. Anyway, she is stabbed by him, and she's left for dead, you assume, but we don't actually know if she dies or not. Yeah. And I really hope when Scream 5 comes out in 2022, if it comes out in 2022, thanks Corona, I really hope she makes an appearance, because she's the fucking coolest.
Yeah.
Her acting's brilliant, just the facial expressions. She's
a good face
great.
actress.
If she's like the new Sidney, I'd be happy with that.
Yeah.
And what a cool fucking name too, Kirby.
Yeah.
I love it. I just think it's great. But it was a good twist. But like you said, I don't think they needed two killers again.
No, I did like Jill as the killer. I think she's better as the killer character than Charlie. Mm-hmm. Her motivation, having a famous cousin and wanting that for herself, and the way she goes about doing that. I think the big kind of highlight of the movie for me is the scene where she's kind of beating the crap out of herself to make it look like she's been attacked.
Yeah, she throws herself into that glass table.
Stabs herself,
rams herself into the wall,
throws herself into a picture, and then, does the old flop through the glass coffee table at the end. Yeah. And then that final scene in the hospital where she realises Sidney's still alive and goes to kill her.
With the what are they called? The paddles to her head.
Yeah.
That was a pretty cool kill, to be fair. And her body's just on the floor, and her head is like smoking. And then she comes back. Yeah. And they have to put her down. Why do they keep doing this?
Yeah.
Why do they keep doing this?
I think my biggest problem with the whole Scream series, aside from 3, is how every single villain is just killed by being shot. To me, gunshot deaths in horror movies are quite bland and boring. The villain should be getting a pretty spectacular send off rather than just being shot in the head.
Considering all the creative kills they've had for the villains' victims,
yes,
it does seem like a bit of a letdown.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a bit of a run through of the 4 movies to date in the Scream franchise and kind of our thoughts on them. So now I think to finish off this lengthy first episode, we should give our individual rankings on all the Scream movies and a kind of a little bit of justification, I suppose, as to why. Do you want to go first?
What am I going for?
I mean,
worst to best,
let's do worst at the same time, okay? Because I'm pretty sure it's going to be the same. So after 3, which Scream movie is the worst? 1, 2, 3.
Scream
3. Yeah, because it's an absolute skip fire. So go on then. What's your third?
Ooh, I don't know. I think I'm tied. I think Scream 2 and Scream 4 kind of have that tie. I can't pick because, like I said before, I didn't really think Scream 4 needed to be made, but it is good. Like I would watch it more than I would watch Scream 3, but that's not hard. And Scream 2, again, there's little bits in there that put me off watching it again. Like
if you have to make a decision right now and rank them.
Scream 2 as my third.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same, and I thought that would surprise you slightly because I always thought you preferred 2 over 4. I always thought you didn't like 4 that much.
No, I think 2 is third for me, then 4, and then obviously the first film is the best one.
Exactly the same. So, no arguments happening on this episode with our rankings with these movies. So, yeah, again, for me, 3 at the absolute bottom because it's terrible. Then 2 because it's a good follow-up to the first one, but not quite as good. 4 above that because it was, it did kind of bring back the horror elements to the franchise and it has a bit more originality in there, aside from the stupid effect on the camera lens where everything looks like it's covered in Vaseline throughout the whole film. That weird blur effect.
Yeah,
it's like a bit odd. It's like J.J. Abrams with his bloody lens flare. It's terrible. And then obviously the best is Scream, the original. It's never been topped. It's such a good movie.
I am excited to see where 5's going to take it though.
I am, but I'm also not because
Wes Craven's not directing it.
Yeah.
I'm really sad about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rest in peace. It's awful that one of the best kind of horror movie directors and creative minds in the genre is not with us anymore and isn't going to have a hand in making the 5th movie. But yeah, I'll definitely watch it. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it won't be the worst movie I've ever seen. It won't even be the worst horror movie I've ever seen unless it is spectacularly bad, but it will be good seeing all those characters come back once again. If those characters are coming back, it might just be a reboot/remake where everyone's replaced with new characters. Or a Kirby trilogy if Kate gets her wish. Yeah.
I sincerely hope it's a Kirby trilogy, but I would like to see my Queen Sidney back again.
I just want to see Dewey come back. Just to see how they kill him this time, but not actually kill him this time.
I just hope he finally gets killed because they've teased it so many times.
Well, David Arquette might kill himself before then. He's wrestling death matches.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh,
see,
no.
this is wrestling nerd Fraz coming through. One of the reasons I do like David Arquette so much, he wrestled a death match last year, I think. A guy was holding a piece of broken light tube to his neck and he moved the wrong way and basically stabbed himself in the neck.
Jesus.
And was bleeding quite heavily. So, yeah.
Was he reenacting his 2 deaths from Scream?
2 deaths from Scream.
1 and 2.
Yeah, I don't think Dewey's ever had a light tube held to his throat, but he's been stabbed a few times and shot a few times. So, yeah, let's see how many more times they can tease killing off Dewey.
I hope they kill off Gale.
She's a bit of a bitch in the first movie, but she
redeems herself a little bit, but
apart from the fringe in 3. And on that fringy note, that brings us to the end of our first episode. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back. I don't think we've got much of a schedule set so far.
It's kind of hard to set a schedule around a newborn.
We're going to record and release as often as we can. But keep an eye on all our social media for updates, news of when our next episode will be out. We're posting on there fairly regularly. Twitter, follow us at What's Scary Pod. Instagram, we're at favourite scary movie _podcast. That one needs to be a bit catchier and shorter. And our YouTube channel, what's your favourite scary movie? Favourite in Instagram and YouTube is spelt with a U because we're British, so we spell things how they're supposed to be spelled. Oof. No offence to American listeners, we both have American family, so we're allowed to say these things, really. But yeah, keep an eye on that as well, because as well as the podcast going on there in audio format, we're going to be working on some video content soon. We're going to start doing some reactions, maybe some streams, reacting to movies as we're watching them. Obviously, we won't be including the movies in those videos because the big bad copyright goons will come and get us and take us down from YouTube. But yeah, we're going to work on more stuff for the future, and our next episode will be up soon.
So let us know what you thought about our first episode. I mean, do you agree with our opinions? I'd love to hear. I'd love to have a little debate with somebody about the Scream films.
Yeah.
And obviously, let us know what your favourite scary movie is, because we need content to talk about. I've kind of got a little poll in my head going whether we should talk about the Nightmare on Elm Street, the first one, next, or the Friday the 13th. Next.
Yeah. So the idea we're working on next is going to be one of those original 4 character franchises. So Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Halloween, or Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
I think I might run a poll on Twitter,
Yeah.
So if you want to get involved, and if you want to hear us talk about your favourite scary movie, then you need to follow us and let us know.
Let us know what's your favourite scary movie.
And we will talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.